department and our food services here on campus for preparing and serving the meal and providing the coffee and donuts this morning. It's one of the highlights of a visit to our campus for those of you who haven't been here before, and those of you who are here often already know about it, I guess. But we do have a wonderful food services department and a wonderful culinary department. We'd like to thank Dean Daniel and his students and help today for the meal. This morning, as we started off, I mentioned to you the idea of considering the question of what would happen if we considered that learning is our most precious natural resource. How would it change what we do on a daily basis in the classroom? How would it change our lives, and how would it change our world? And as I mentioned, that's an idea that's been circulating for me for the last few months here, largely because of the man that I'm about to introduce to you. This is kind of interesting. I ran across Diacom Technologies and Mr. Brode because of my brother-in-law, and he was looking at different kinds of companies to invest in, and ran across some of what Diacom is doing. And then from there, it sounded like it fit in with a lot of different things that OSU Okmulgee is interested in, and we began a dialogue. It wasn't until a few months later that I found out that's what the DIA and Diacom stands for, and by that time I was fully aware of what the dialogue process was for this company. Mr. Brode is with Diacom Technologies, which is in California, and he'll probably tell you a little bit more about that. He and David Bolton are the co-founders of this company. They both have backgrounds working with Apple Computer and many different projects over there over an extended period of time, and now have kind of gone their own way to test new frontiers. And what he's going to talk to us about today is about learning and this idea of learning as a natural resource. So I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Ian Brode.
Thank you. Can I move this? Yes, I can move this. Can you all hear me? Well, firstly, let me get one thing out of the way, which is my accent. People always want to find out where it is, and they never listen to what I say because they're trying to figure it out. My accent is South African, but I live in California and have done so for the last 18 years. And at my age, it's very difficult to change the way you talk, so I decided not to. Actually, what I'm billed to speak to you about is learning at the heart of high performance and high achievement. And so I want to start off with dispensing quickly with performance and achievement so we can get on to learning. And the way I'd like to do that is to say that as a context is that the global economy is here to stay. And what that means is that competition is getting much, much fiercer and is coming from directions that we never anticipated before. I want to give you a quick example of the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Mazda introduced a car, the Miata. Are you all familiar with it? It's a little convertible. Well, the story is that there were a couple of youngsters who were studying engineering in Southern California who had an idea of a car that they felt would sell well in California. And so they contacted a few of the local domestic car manufacturers. They couldn't get a hearing. So they contacted Japanese companies, and an executive from Mazda came out, took a ride with them in a prototype, and said, yeah, we'll build this. And these were two guys in a garage in Southern California. If you have a look at where the future is coming from, there is no reason why OSU, Okmulgee, and MIT are not going to be bidding on the same distance learning project for some Indonesian, Malaysian, Taiwanese project in 18 months from now. Because the way in which we think about our economies, the way in which we think about the borders have changed. And information is flowing so fast and so furiously now that the competitive arena that we were used to has gone. Number one. Number two is businesses want to be high performance operations because of the competition. And so what they are looking for are people that are capable of high performance. So they are beginning to make demands, and have been for a while, but this is becoming more accelerated. They're making demands on the rest of society, namely the education system and parents, to produce people that are capable of high performance and high achievement. What does that mean? What is high performance? What is performance? Performance is doing. It's just it's a more formal way of saying doing. So what we're looking for is people that can do things in an above average, an exceptional, an ongoing, high level way. That's what high performance is about. Sustaining it over time. What is achievement? Achievement comes from the French achève, which means to the head or at the head. It really means to conclude, to accomplish. So to achieve is to accomplish. High achievement is to be accomplished at a high level, above average, exceptional, over a long period of time. So that's what we're looking at. Now I'm thinking to myself as I'm preparing this talk, is there a way that we can take this conversation from this abstract level? Because so far, basically, if you think about what I've said, it's all just abstract ideas that in each one of your minds is a model that firstly I have no access to, and number two is that we don't have a common understanding of what that means. So let's look at these words and say, how do we perform? And what I submit to you is that there is nothing, and I know I'm going to stand corrected because somebody's going to tell me that there is something. So there's almost nothing that we do that we have not learned. Just think about it for a second. Think about what you do. Breathing, you probably didn't learn to breathe. You were born breathing. Although I want to tell you that I've done some exercises with people, and for those of you that are interested, when we finish, we'll do one with you too. And I'm prepared to wager that there are a lot of people in this room who don't breathe properly. That's another story. Moving, we didn't learn. We were born with it wired into our system. But everything else we have learned. So that's where I want to start. Because unless we can really have an understanding of what it means to learn, the notion, and by the way, David Bolton, who's the president of DICOM, a friend and a colleague of mine, introduced me to this concept about 10 years ago, which is that learning, our capacity for learning, is the most valuable resource on this planet. Our human capacity for learning is the most valuable, most precious resource that we have. Unless we have a common vocabulary, a common understanding of what we mean by learning, then we might as well throw the conversation out the window because we're back at that abstract level where everybody's got a different something about it. So let's start with the notion of what is learning. And I want to take you back to when a child is born. Now, David Bolton adds one more dimension to this notion of learning. And he calls it, and I'm going to unpack this sentence for you, but let me just say it. He calls it the disambiguation of feedback. What does he mean by that? When a child is born, the organism, and let's think about the human being as a biological organism, has a very limited presence. It is contained almost completely internally. Its eyes are shut. It has no cognition of the external world, or very little cognition of the external world. So all the activity that is occurring in this organism is occurring internally. I have a kid who has colic. I had a kid. I have a kid. She had colic when she was a little girl. And I had to read up a lot about it because, you know, when you're a parent, you think that everything that's going on with a kid is your fault, or either it's your fault or you take credit for it. And so there I was every night with this little baby that was crying, and we had no idea. It wasn't like anything we did. And so I started reading books and began to understand that colic is about the evolution of the nervous system, that the nervous system hasn't fully matured and being ready for birth yet. So it's just like it's going on, but now it's outside in the world, and this is happening. So a lot of the feedback that's going on inside is internal. As this is happening, and the child begins to grow, let's think about the kid in the first year, right? What happens is that the child begins to extend its presence into the world. It starts to become aware of things. It opens its eyes and begins to see. It starts to distinguish light and dark. It starts to recognize shapes. What is that? It's feedback from the external world, which the child is disambiguating, making less ambiguous. First there was light. First there was dark. Then there was light. Then there was different shades of light. Then there was different forms. Then there was a form that we continue to recognize. That's the mommy form. That's the daddy form. The words only come later. But what is talking? We learn to talk. How do we learn to talk? We learn to talk through feedback, physical feedback, the shape of the tongue, and we start to utter sounds. We hear, we start making distinctions, and as we utter sounds, certain of those sounds sound to certain people with whom we interact like dada or mama or what have you, and they go, yeah, right, and then the kid goes, oh wow, this feels great, okay, I'll say it again, and so we start learning to interact, we start learning to relate. So the process of learning is a process at that level. Think about the learning that I'm talking about now. It's kinesthetic, physiological, and the feedback is immediate. A few months later, now it's like 9 months have gone by, and the child begins to learn to walk. Now let me ask you a question. How many of you were given a manual to learn to walk? Did anybody give you anything to read and say, here are the walking instructions? Nobody. Right? What happened? When you learn to walk, a very interesting phenomenon occurred. Your internal impulse at a very, very deep core level, your internal impulse was to follow the model that you saw around you and also to stretch your presence. And so you started to crawl and you started to push and to get feedback from the earth. And think about this. If when you learn to walk, you picked your foot up and you put your foot down on the floor, and it took 3 seconds for your body to get the feedback that your foot had touched the floor. Think how difficult that would have been to learn to walk. It had to be immediate. And there was nobody giving you feedback, although this is an arguable point, because I've seen a lot of situations where what I'm about to say is not true, but there was nobody giving you feedback that you were a loser because you weren't doing, because you were falling down the first time you walked. And so what was happening? When you fell down and you couldn't walk, you still fundamentally trusted. And I'm going to come back to that word, and if it's the only word you take away from what I say, it is key. You trusted your own inner core that you would be able to walk. And for the vast majority of humanity, we learn to walk by trusting ourselves. Now, we start to grow. And as we start to grow, we start extending our presence now, not in the physical, kinesthetic domain, but in the abstract, mental domain. We start to learn to read. We start to learn to communicate with one another. We start to engage with ideas which have imprints on us where the feedback from our thoughts and our ideas is more attenuated. It's not immediate like it was when we learned to walk, when we learned to talk. And so what happens is that we become less and less trusting of our own capacity for learning. And I put it to you that if we can't trust our own capacity for learning, we're already putting our fingers on what we need to go back to. Now, let's just stop there and move to another domain. For a couple of thousand years now, human beings have thought that learning is a utility for getting knowledge. In our society, just let's take our Western society, when I say to you, learning, I submit to you that what you think is learning to, learning about. I learn to do this. I learn a skill. You're all talking about, we've got to get away from just giving kids information and they got to regurgitate it. Now what we've got to do is we've got to emphasize they got to learn new skills for the 21st century. And so now the focus is on learning skills. And I put it to you that it's just replacing one domain with another domain. And that the emphasis is still on learning as a utility to knowledge, skills, and experience. The key to what I'm talking to you about today is that thinking has got to be inverted. It's what David Bolton calls the inversion. We have to invert that paradigm. And what do I mean by that? I mean that what we've got to start thinking about is that the most important thing is our capacity for learning, not what we know. And therefore, if we don't design everything as if learning is the point, and their knowledge, skill, and experience are just the exercise domains for the capacity for learning, nothing is going to change. How do we do that? How can we change a paradigm? Because once we change it, everything changes. How many people in this room recycle their garbage? Does anybody recycle their garbage here? Anybody not? Does anybody not recycle their garbage? Raise your hands, people who don't recycle. Okay, so the majority of people recycle. Now I want to say to you that 10 years ago, and I'm not making a value judgment one way or the other, and you'll hear why right now. 10 years ago, I really believed in recycling. I still do. But I never used to do it. And the reason I never used to do it was a pain. It was too difficult. I had all this garbage, and what am I going to do? And then they opened these centers where I had to take the things, I had to separate them and get special stuff, and then I had to drive them down to this place, and they were never there. It was always the grey bears, you know, or some senior citizen organization was doing it, and they were always on lunch break, and it was just a pain in the neck. I couldn't do it. So, my espoused theory, my belief, and I was sincere about it, I believed in recycling, but I didn't recycle. I felt a little guilty about not recycling, but I got over it. But I used to talk to my kids about it, and you know, we're going to do this, and my wife was also the same as me. And we used to blame each other, you know, a little bit, and you know how it goes, and that was fun. And then one day, in my town, a company came along called Waste Management, Inc. It's a very enterprising name. And they provided us with 3 little boxes. A yellow box for newspapers, a light green box for cans and plastic, and a dark green box, which was a mistake, by the way, because I'm colorblind, so I had to learn the difference between light green and dark green, but a dark green box for glass. Guess what? I started recycling. Not only did I start recycling, but everybody in my town started recycling. And in the United States of America, where that infrastructure has been put in place, the recycling is off the curve exponentially. People recycle in many, many places around this country. What's this got to do with what I was talking about before? Well, I put it to you that until now, until this period of time, like starting, let's say, today, we have not had the capacity, the infrastructural capability of inverting that learning paradigm. Why? Because we have not had the ability to get feedback immediately in domains other than I am here present with you right now, or I'm doing something. In other words, when I go and play golf, I hit the ball, I don't have to wait for 6 months for somebody to come out with a report of whether I passed or failed. I hit the ball, it goes out there, I go, I don't want to tell you what I say when I do that, but I get immediate feedback. I ride my bike, I fall off, I get feedback, you weren't riding well, or what have you. Or I'm sitting in a conversation with you, or with you, or with you, and I look at you, and you say stuff, and after a little while, especially if I've opened myself up to my feminine side, and I don't say that lightly, by the way,
I do not say that lightly. If I've opened myself up to my feminine side, I can learn a lot about the interaction that we have, and I'm getting feedback from you. Right now, in this audience, I'm getting feedback about my presentation. Some of you are sitting there going, I can't wait to get out of here. Others are, you know, whatever's happening, I'm getting the feedback. But in the distributed world, which is the majority of our lives, we have been removed from that ability, and consequently, the focus has been on what we know. Knowledge is power. Think of the tyrannies that we've been subjected to, that we are part of right now. And now all of a sudden, the playing field is changing. And a new era is coming in. And unless we change the way we think about our capacity for learning, we will harness the new technology to do what we've been doing for thousands of years. But it will be much more insidious than it has been up to now. Because the technologies that are coming now and are here are so pervasive that the potential for manipulation, the potential for control, is even greater than ever before. How am I doing on top? Okay. So, let's analyze now, technologically, where we've come from, where we are, and where we're going. Where we've come from, technologically, has been a broadcast paradigm, a frame of broadcast. This model right here is the frame that we've come from. Books, radio, television, teaching, parenting, what have you, has been, I say, you listen. We've broadcast at each other. And by the way, the technology has just been that way. It hasn't been capable, except for the telephone, obviously. The telephone was a tremendous breakthrough from that perspective, where we were able to communicate two ways. But what's fascinating is that even in our conversation, even in our face-to-face conversation, our ability to dialogue, to actually explore meaning with one another. Only until very recently was Harvard was relegated to a few people in society. The majority of us, when we get in a conversation, I don't know what happens in your house, but I can tell you what happens in mine. And it's a broadcast. I say you will do that, and they say no. Right? And that's how it works. And we tell. So broadcast has been the paradigm. And let me just take a step aside for a second. I want to tell you a quick story. I'll come back. This friend of mine and colleague, David Bolton, was a very successful businessman. And he just got sick and tired of it. You know, he had all the toys, he had a boat, and he had cars and everything, and it was like, he didn't feel like his life was amounting to anything. So he dropped out of it. He had been a high school dropout. Well, I think he graduated high school. But he became successful in business, not because he was well educated. And when he dropped out of business, he went on what he calls a learning binge, just to learn as much as he could. What he discovered was that the way information is organized in the world is that when you're at the edge, when you're at the surface of information, it appears to be confidently, this is the way it is. It is so. However, as as he dug deeper and deeper into whatever subject he went into, whether it was math or physics or psychology or anthropology or religion, no matter what it was, as he got deeper and deeper into it, he realized that at the heart of every single domain, there was a raging debate, because nobody knew. Those were the people who were learning all the time and coming up with, and back and forth, and there was no real, this is the way it is, because guess what? That's the way it is. The only way it is that there is no one way of how it is. So, he concluded what I've told you before, that the only recourse we have, if that's the case, is to think about how could we redesign everything so that it unfolded for the individual according to the way they need to be able to learn better. Because everybody learns differently. Not only does everybody learn differently, everybody learns different things differently. I don't know about you, but sometimes I don't want to read anything. I just want to hear it quickly. Other times, I don't want to hear it. I want to read it. Other times, I don't want to do either. I just want to see it. Other times, I don't want to do any of that. I want to feel it. Other times, I want to see it, I want to read it, I want to hear it, I want to feel it. It doesn't matter. It depends what it is. It depends what mood I'm in. It depends what I had for breakfast or didn't have for lunch, and on and on and on. And I think I'm a pretty normal person. I'm an average guy. So, the domain that we've been in has been, or the paradigm, the frame that we've been in, has been broadcast technology. That changed. And at least in the high-tech world, what we moved to was interactive technology. Now, if broadcast technology is controlled engagement, think about that. It's controlled engagement. I engage you, and I control your engagement. You either, if you can, say, I'm not going to do this anymore. You stop reading the book, or you switch off the radio, or you space out in the classroom, or what have you. But that's your only recourse, is on or off. But once you're there, you are being controlled in your engagement by the broadcast. Interactive technology came along, and people went, this is it. This is the future. The future is interaction. And now you've got all this, and you've got CD-ROMs and Schmeedy-ROMs and all this stuff that's coming out, and now we're interactive. And I put it to you that interactive is directed engagement. You're still being you're engaged. Your recourse is still that you can switch it on or switch it off. It is different than, and it's an order of magnitude different than controlled engagement. But you're still within a frame which has been designed by the instructional designer or the educator or the author or the whatever out there who has an assumptive model about what it is that you need to be getting. I'm sorry, I talk with my hands, so sometimes the mic is flying over here. I only just realized. You notice I stopped talking the minute my hand stopped moving. I put my hand in my pocket, I thought I'll just be less distracting, and I couldn't talk. So, interactive now is directed engagement. It's a phase. It's a transition phase to the next phase, which is dialogue, dialogical communication, dialogical technology. And there, the engagement is participative, where we are actually going to be able to participate. And what does that mean? It means we're going to be able to participate in our curriculum. It means we're going to be able to participate in our work. We're going to participate in our outcomes. We're going to participate in our features and benefits, in our debits, in our pluses and in our minuses, but we are going to be able to participate. Now, if you think about the consequences in terms of our emotional makeup, that for thousands of years we have been used to a control medium of relating, and all of a sudden we are going to have to become democratic. Not democratic like the Democratic Party, right? And I don't want to turn this into a political arena, but all I can tell you is that my understanding of democracy is participation. It's about participating. It's about having a voice. And granted, we are one of the greatest societies on the planet in terms of being able to participate and have a voice. And yet, we have 50%, over 50% of our population who don't have a voice in the Constitution. We have groups in our society that cannot participate by virtue of their orientation, by virtue of their skin color, by virtue of whatever. And then if we take that to the educational domain, and we think about how many children cannot participate, all of them, except for those exceptional teachers who are there with small groups of people, and they work and they enable those kids to participate in learning. And I can tell you right now, and I'm prepared to close my eyes and wager, that if I ask you how many teachers you can recall from your childhood that really enabled you to participate in the design and the unfolding of the lessons day after day, the majority of you will say between 0 and 2. I can't even remember the names of most of my teachers, and they had as much impact on me, I don't want to say as my parents, but sometimes they did. Sometimes they had as much impact on me as my parents, in fact. And I don't even remember them. Because it was like I was going through this process, which Bolton calls the insidious curriculum. Because what did we learn in school? No, I want to put it differently. What do we learn in school? What is the most pervasive lesson that we learn in school? This is not a rhetorical question. I'm actually asking you.
Do what you're told.
To do what you're told. Okay, we're scratching it. What we really learn, the most pervasive lesson that we learn in school, is that the core of who we are, those impulses in us which drive us to be curious, to learn, are irrelevant to learning. Sit still, don't move, do this, shake the letter like whatever it is. Is it bad? No, it's not bad. It's the way it is. Is anybody at fault? Are teachers at fault? Yeah, let's put the blame on teachers. Of course it's not teachers' fault. Society's organized that way. It is such a pervasive system out there that education is a manifestation of it. It's not education's fault. That's the way it is. So, here we are moving with broadcast technologies, interactive technologies, we're moving to dialogical technologies, where we are actually going to be able to participate. And now the question becomes, what is it? What is the nature of those relationships? And what the phrase that I want to give to you is that those relationships must be mutually learning oriented. You can't teach anybody anything. All you can do is create an environment in which you learn and then invite them in to participate with you in the domain, and if you're a teacher, it's the domain of your choice, such that the learning is occurring in a mutually respectful, mutually learning-oriented way. It is the most minimally presumptuous thing that we can do. And it is the most maximally relevant thing that we can do. And so that if we can now design everything we do, no matter what it is that we do, to at the same time as we're doing anything else, in other words, we're imparting information, we're imparting knowledge, we're promoting a skill or what have you, at the same time, we are continually mindful of addressing the evolution, the growth, the nurturing of each and every individual's capacity for learning. We will be in the future. And as Krishnamurti once said, the future is now. So many of us spend our lives getting ready to get ready. You know, it's like, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then my life is going to begin. And it's like, think of how many of us in society go through our lives, and if we could run a flashback, we'd go, I missed the point. I spent my whole life getting ready to have a life. And this is the same thing. If we don't change now, we're not going to change. And if we don't change, unless we own the fact that we're having difficulty changing, and we publicly hang our laundry up and say, here's this. Here's where I'm having difficulty. Help me. Give me feedback. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. Not what I'm doing wrong, naughty boy, bad. Tell me what your view is. Not that you make a value judgment about me, the person, but that you notice my actions. You help me be more perceptive. You give me that videotape of my swing, or of my process, or of my practice. Because let's come back to the original thing that I said. And with this, I'm going to end so we can dialogue together. It's all about trust. But I can't ask you to trust me if I don't trust myself. And as long as I don't trust my own capacity for learning, talking about trusting myself is already a second-order conversation. It's already removed from where the core is occurring. So learning to learn is not now a skill that we're going to pick up. It's more about learning that we learn. We're always learning, folks. Every minute of every day, whether we're awake or asleep, this organism is learning. It's learning how not to learn. It's learning how to be frightened. It's learning how to love. It's learning how to hug. It's learning how to kick. It's learning how to talk. It's learning how to do whatever it's doing. It is learning all the time. If that's the tabula, the basis, then the question becomes now, the challenge becomes standing on that. How do we design the systems around it? And then, once we've done that, high performance, high achievement will just flow out of that. Empowerment, all the abstract phrases that we are becoming attached to, which show us that we want to be in this direction, will now clear up in the process of living, which is learning. Thank you. Now, you can give me a real good message message here, because you can either not ask any questions and that'll be that, and you'll walk out of here and we ended early, which is fine as far as I'm concerned. But if you ask me what my preference is, my preference would be that we could engage at least a little bit in a dialogue. If people have got contrary views to mine, you've got questions, you've got statements that you want to make, doesn't matter. But some participation would be my preference. Go ahead.
How do individuals within the system help influence the system to provide this type of learning?
Did everybody hear the question? Well, firstly, let me say that it would be too glib for me to give you an answer and say, here, this is how you do it. It's easy, right? It isn't. The first thing is that we've got to start wearing these possibilities. We've got to really start dialoguing with ourselves and get ourselves to a point where we have crossed the fence, where we've stepped over the fence. Now, how do I do that? And that's all I can tell you is how I do it personally, and then you'll have to do it how you want. And it's not going to start with influencing the system. It's with influencing my own practice. The first thing is I choose a metaphor where I'm really good. That was hard, because I'm not really good. I'm a dabbler, but I'm not really good at anything, you know what I mean? So I chose golf. That was my metaphor. I loved golf. When I started this company, Diacon, it became too difficult to play golf, so I had to change my metaphor. But it doesn't matter what you choose. It can be, now I do it with gardening. I have dogs. I have 2 animals. I have children. Well, I have 1 child and 1 adult. I have a 23-year-old son who's not a kid anymore. But whatever it is, the metaphor that you choose is then practice. Try to be this way in that metaphor. And try to just be open to the process of just getting better at learning and supporting your own capacity and feel how that feels. And it's really interesting, because what starts to happen is that you start getting less attached to results and more attached to the process. And what you learn also is that a lot of the theory out there has a view, comes from a person's subjective experience. So I began to realize, for example, I started, and I'm sorry to harp on the golf analogy for a lot of you who don't play golf and are thinking, get out of here, talk some other thing. But it's helpful just so that you understand. I'm left-handed. For anybody who's left-handed, you know that being left-handed is you're never completely left-handed. You're always kind of mainly left-handed, or there's some weirdness about you. And so I'm ambidextrous really in a lot of situations. And so what happened was that I was taught to play golf. I got some lessons, but I couldn't putt. I was useless at putting, but not good. I was useless. Until one day I decided I'm going to putt left-handed. Because I was playing golf, I play golf right-handed. I was taught to play right-handed. And all of a sudden, I started playing left-handed, and now I can putt, and it's the best part of my game. Another example is I had a boss who, he and I used to go and play racquetball together, because we decided, we went through this thing about not having rank in our organization, and he couldn't get out of it. He was espousing it. He was saying, look, we've got to leave I'm the boss, but I'm not the boss, I'm the manager, we've got to keep it at the door. But he wasn't capable of doing it. But I knew he was sincere about it. So I suggested to him, listen, let's go and do something where both of us are equal, where we play racquetball together. He said, fine, we play racquetball together. Well, I went in the first thing, and I started playing racquetball with him, and I played racquetball right-handed. And I could murder him. And I went, wait a second, this is not the way to go about it. Right. First thing you do out of the blocks is you humiliate this guy. The experiment is not going to work.
So I converted it into a learning experience for myself, and I started playing left-handed with him. And so obviously he beat the heck out of me for a while, but I started to learn this other dimension of myself, exercise this capacity that I have, and now I can play racquetball both ways. These are mundane examples, but that's where I think we've got to start. We've got to start with, as the yogi would say, I don't care how fancy you are. I eat when I'm hungry, and I sleep when I'm tired. And if we can get mundane about it, then we'll come to the system. By that time, you will have changed. And when you've changed, the system is different. Right? That's my sense. And so let's see. Let's see if that works. But that's as best as I can do. Yes, sir.
You're quoting this, you're talking about dialogic learning. I believe quoting a brief fellow before address. That same fellow said, and you're talking about participative democracy, that same fellow said that this is all good. It leads to socialism, equality, self-fulfillment. But inherently, capitalism will destroy it. Now, if he's correct, perhaps what we're doing now is simply something that we're allowed to do at the indulgence of business. The 18 societies that were put on the screen this morning by our opening speaker are going to drop the hammer on actual worldwide participative, aggressive self-enrichment and democracy. Have we thought about those aspects of what we're advocating?
Well, the short answer is yes. Maybe a little bit about my background would be helpful for you, because I don't want to get into a political conversation, because I personally feel that what we're talking about here is so much more fundamental than any political. Politics is a sliver of our lives. It has been described as the relational domain. You know, if you get two people together, more than two people together, you've got a political situation. And on the one hand, I can understand that. On the other hand, what I believe that what we're talking about here is so much more fundamental than that. A little bit about my background. I grew up in South Africa. South Africa was the most, as far as I'm concerned, not having lived in Nazi Germany, not having lived in Cambodia, but South Africa was the most autocratic, fascistic, totalitarian society on the face of the earth. And I experienced that for 20 years. I then went to live in Israel because I was a Jew, and I thought, I'll get out of this, and I'll go to a country where I can be myself. Right? And I went there, and I lived on a kibbutz, which is a socialist environment. And I learned that there are a whole host of problems about socialism and about how the state is manifesting itself in Israel, and about how we were treating other people, and so on and so forth. And so I thought, and by the way, when I got there, I was a South African, because I was different. And so I couldn't get away from being categorized there. And I don't want to compare South Africa and Israel, because they are very different. But my experience was, I got to get out of there. So I said, where can I go in the world where I can just be me? And I went to California. It's true. And now I can look at my capitalist side and my socialist side and my Jewish side and my male side and all those as parts of who I am. But I am me.
my identity is higher than all of that. And so what I'm saying to you is, yes, I understand the rhetoric, and I understand the polemics, and I understand that we're coming on an election year, and I understand all the issues, but I look from left, and I look from right, and I look back and forth again, and like the animals in Animal Farm, after a while it's difficult to tell which is which. And so as far as I'm concerned, we've got to get deep down inside of us and say, what if we don't want to switch the lights out on this planet in the next 25 years to 50 years to 75 years, if we want to steward this society, this globe that we're on, so that it will in fact sustain life going forward, and I'll be able, and maybe this is just my shtick, that I want to be able to give to my kids and their kids and their kids a place which was slightly better than when I arrived in it. I can't find anything which is more fundamental than our ability to learn. I don't think we're going to get smart quickly. I don't think our brains are going to evolve over the next 25 years for us to go, okay, we can solve all the problems. I think it's a question of collaborating, of pooling our intelligence, but at the same time, it's a question of enhancing our intelligence. And I don't think we can enhance our intelligence in any way more effectively than by becoming better learners. And so if we don't do it now, I think what we're doing is, once we've heard this, and we go, if we agree with that, then the question becomes every night, you're going to stand in front of the mirror, and you can say, you know, I remember what that guy said at the Okmulgee Interconnect Conference on whatever today's date is. And look yourself in the mirror and say, I agreed. And it may only be two of you. You and you. No, I'm kidding. But it may only be two people who agree. But those two people are going to look themselves in the mirror and say, if I agreed, what prevents me? What is preventing me from taking some action? I didn't really answer your question, though. I'm sorry. I just got back on the soapbox.
It was a hard question.
No. You're good at hard questions. Okay, folks, thank you. Have a wonderful conference. I think this thing is really going well, and I hope at least we've been able to, you know, see things a little differently. Thank you.
Fill out your evaluation forms, and I think Anita will be back here at the doors as you leave the stateroom. And then things this afternoon are back in the Noble Center. Again, I'll remind you about the interactive reception, which is between 4 and 6 in the lobby in the Noble Center. I've been asked, why are we calling it an interactive reception? I thought all receptions were interactive, but we're referring to interactive learning. Not just interaction of people. So there will be some different exhibits going on from the different presenters. If you can't make it to somebody's session during the breakout sessions, but you would like to see what they're doing, then chances are they'll be at the interactive reception today, and you can see examples then and maybe talk a little bit more easily one-on-one with some of the developers we have. So we'll see you back in the Noble Center.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was thinking. As I was sitting back there.
do you think you're taking?
Are these candid shots that people walk?